Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm creating a tag shaped card using the Altenew Builder Flower Candystripe Cosmos layering stamp and die set. So let's get started. This is the Altenew Builder Flower Candystripe Cosmos set. So pretty, one of the larger sets from Altenew, and you've got the outline there of the Candystripe Cosmos, and then you've got layers that you can add on top with different colours for stamp layering, or you can just stamp out the outline and colour that with different mediums as well, and it does come with a die set. So I'm taking the outline layer first and I'm going to stamp that down onto some white cardstock. This is £110 classic Crest solar white cardstock. And here I'm just figuring out where the stem really should be stamped. I'm kind of just trying to place the stamp down without manipulating it. I did get it wrong and I couldn't manage to line it up with the die set, but I do have a solution for you a little bit later on what I should have done. But for the time being, I'm stamping this down with Altenew Obsidian Pigment ink. This is a really pretty dark black ink. It is a pigment ink though, so it does take a little while to dry. I'm very impatient when it comes to these stamp layering sets, so I'm just going to heat that with my heat tool just to dry that layer to make sure that it doesn't blend or anything with the layers that I add on top. I'm then taking the stamp packaging. I love that Altenew have a really lovely stamp packaging, and it shows you how to layer all of these different stamps on top of each other. So I'm taking the first layer here and I'm just using that stamp packaging to make sure I know where I'm going to line it up. And then ordinarily I would cut my head out of the video, but I wanted to show you, in case you're new to these sets, that you really do need to get right over the set to be able to see where it's lining up, or at least I do anyway. This is a brand new set, so I'm using the Altenew Stamp Conditioning Eraser set, and I'm just taking that eraser and kind of rubbing it all over the stamp. I did get a little bit of residue because I pressed a little bit too hard. Ordinarily you wouldn't get that, so after using the eraser on the stamp you can go straight in with the ink pad. Because I used it a little bit too forcefully, I did go in with my stamp chamois and just remove that, and it still stamped perfectly well. It's just for the first time you stamp it, it helps with the manufacturing process. Sometimes you get a little bit of residue on the stamp, so it just removes that and makes it so that the inks stick to the stamp really nicely. So I'm inking up the first layer here with pink diamond ink, and this is from my favourite Altenew crisp dyeing collection, which is the Cherry Blossom set. I absolutely love these pinks and I do use them quite a lot. So I'm just taking the stamp packaging here and making sure where I need to line up the second layer. And for this layer, I'm using the Pinkalicious colour. So I'm just inking up this really well. I am using the cubes, as you can see, so it does take a little bit longer for me to ink up the stamp, but I really love these cube sets because they take a bit less storage space for me anyway. So I'm just stamping that down onto the image, and I am going to double stamp this. I didn't feel like I needed to double stamp the first layer, but for these other layers I am going to double stamp them. So I'm just inking that up again really well so that I can stamp that over the top, and that's just going to give me a slightly darker impression, but also just make sure that I get a really nice impression as well. So for the next layer, again, I'm just going to lean it over and make sure where it's going to be lined up with the stamp packaging. And then for all of the layers, I do use that conditioning eraser, you can see here, but I did miss it out on some of the layers because I didn't think you need to see me do that for each layer. For this one here, I'm using the Razzleberry colour. So with the Altenew ink pads, they do come, like with the cubes anyway, they come as a set of 4. And so you get a really light, a light, a medium and a dark, however you want to sort of go with them, whether it's dark or extra dark or however you want to do it. And so I missed out one layer and I'm going in with the darkest shade here. I thought that it would be kind of a little bit more dramatic to have that kind of outer layer be really quite dark, and I do think it looked really pretty in the end. For the middle layer, there are 3 layers to this, and I'm going in with the Golden Sunset Crisp dye inks from Altenew, and this shade here is Sunray. For the middle, I'm using Snapdragon. And then for the last layer, I'm using Snapdragon again, but I am going to double stamp it just so that I get a slightly darker impression. Then for the leaves, I'm using the Altenew Green Fields Crisp dye inks. So I'm stamping the first layer here with Frayed Leaf. And again, I am going to double stamp that just so that I get a really nice impression. For the middle layer, I'm using Forest Glades, and this stamps the stem and the leaf. And again, I am going to double stamp that. And then for the last layer, I'm using Evergreen, and I do just stamp that once because it's quite a bit darker than the other 2 shades, and I felt that it gave quite a good impression on the first go. I really do love this flower. I think it's something a little bit different in the shape of it. It kind of looks a bit like it's blowing in the wind. I think it is really very pretty. There is another layer for the leaves, but I didn't use that on my card today. So next, when I went to go and die cut this out, I realised that I didn't place the stem quite in the right place. So if I cut the stem out, the flower head wouldn't cut properly. And if I cut the flower head, the stem wouldn't cut properly. I could do a bit of partial die cutting, but to be honest, I ended up just fussy cutting it out with scissors. But I wanted to show you a trick here that you can do. If you don't want to die cut first and then stamp, you can still do it in the way that I did it. What you do is you take the die and then you just place the stamp kind of on top, and it kind of fits in a bit like a puzzle piece, and then that's going to make sure that the stamp is going to stamp in the way that it is intended to, and it's going to line up with the die. So I just place that in the MISTI, and then I can pick that up, and then I would then ink up the stamp that, and it's going to die cut perfectly. I should have done that in the first place. I didn't, but I wanted to show you this trick. So next I'm going to work on the card base itself, and I'm using the Altenew Terrific Tags dies, and I'm taking one of the larger tags, and I wanted to show you 2 different ways that you can create a tag shaped card, or any shaped card in for that matter. I've got a piece of cardstock here, kind of like you would if you had a top folding card base, so that the fold is at the top. When I run that through my die cutting machine, I'm just going to overlap that top part of the die so that it doesn't cut, and then I get a really nice card base in this way. I wanted to add twine through the whole of the tag, so I couldn't do it that way, otherwise I wouldn't be able to open the card. So I'm going to show you a different way of doing it, how I'm going to do it, and this is how I usually make my shaped cards. Before I do anything together, I do want to stamp my sentiment. So I've just placed one of the tags in the mini MISTI here, and I'm going to take one of the sentiments from the set, and I've just placed my flower inside so that I can see where I want to stamp the sentiment around where the flower's going to be. So I'm just going to line that up, and then I can stamp the sentiment with Obsidian pigment ink again, and the sentiment reads a happy hello. I thought that the flower was quite a happy flower, if that makes sense. I think because it's quite bright in colour with the pinks and the oranges in the centre, I thought it kind of looked a bit like a happy flower, so I thought the sentiment would work quite nicely. I've got the other tag here, and I've placed that in my scoreboard, and I'm using a bone folder here, and I'm just scoring the top of the tag, and this is going to create a hinge to be able to adhere the 2 tags together and still be able to open it like a card base. This is how I usually do my circle cards if I'm going to make a circle shaped cards, and quite often with any shape really. I find it quite a useful way to be able to create shaped cards. So I'm just taking some tape runner here, adding that onto the top of that hinge, and then I can stick that so that the tags are back to back. Make sure that they're well lined up, and then I can press that down. And then I do just tend to lift up that kind of back piece just to make sure that it's going to stand up really nicely and be able to open it when the recipient receives the card. And as you can see, that stands up really nicely as well. So I'm just going to add some Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape onto the back of the piece here. Just making sure where I needed to add the foam tape and where I didn't want to add it, because it's going to overlap the two sides of the tag. So I don't want it to have any foam tape there. So I've added lots of pieces of that foam tape onto the back of the image, just using some tweezers there just to help me out lift off the backings of that foam tape. And then I can also use the tweezers to help me out with the placement of where I want the flower to be. So it's going to kind of nestle around that sentiment. And once I'm happy with where it's placed, I can press down. And then I did just overlap that at the bottom. I like to do that quite often so it looks like the flower is kind of coming up from the top of the tag. So I'm just going to cut that excess off the bottom with some scissors. I've then got some Altenew enamel dots, and these are the cherry blossom colour to match the ink pads that I used on the flower, and I'm just using the darkest shade in this collection. I thought it would work quite nicely with that darkest shade on the kind of outer edges of the flower petals. And I really like these enamel dots because they're not too high in dimension, but they just add a little extra pop of colour. And then to finish off, I'm just going to add some twine through the top of the card. This is why I use that hinge method, like I said, and not the first example of using the tag card. So I've just poked that through the hole in the tag, and then I'm just tying that in a bow at the front. Taking some time just to fiddle around with the bow, making sure that it's how I want it to be, and then I can cut off those tails. And so that's the card finished for today. Like I said, it stands up really nicely. I really like using that hinge method for shaped cards. Links to the products that I used will be in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.